Cash-a-maniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Tonight is the 136th episode of the GeoGearHeads, and we're talking with repeat guest DeBear about his geocaching on trips. Also back with me is the Bad Cop, and I am Daryl W4, recording live August 7th, 2014.
You know, we're going to get to DeBear in just a moment. He can just sit there and listen, because we have a prize winner. And plus, we have a correction from a listener and a question for our guest from another listener. So we've got to pay some bills. And we'd like to thank the patrons for underwriting much of the expense of delivering the GeoGearhead. So thank you, Billy Robson, Going Caching Crew, Jersey Eric, Kitty Catch, Native Texan, Suchman, Wanzong, Wet_Coaster, and our guest tonight, Mr. DeBear. And thank you for more than a dozen other patrons for your continuing support of the show. If you're not already a patron and you want to help support the show, even with just a couple bucks a month, head on over to geogearheads.com and click on the Patreon link. And we'll have a little bit about that a little later.
We're also thrilled to have Cache at Night return as the sponsor of this week's show. They're a terrific source for all sorts of toys for your caching, and one of the coolest emergency power devices that I've set my hands on. And I remembered to actually grab it from the card today so I can actually show it on camera. And it's the AA emergency charger, which I got from them probably about a year ago. And I never use it as intended, and I'm very, very happy that I haven't. See, this cool little box takes 4 AA batteries and gives you a USB port from which you can charge most devices, which charge over USB, or to power them like USB, like running the GPSR while you're changing the battery so you won't have to need to power cycle on the trail. It's also an easy way to carry batteries for the GPSR in an emergency, which I have to admit that I've actually pulled the batteries out of here so I could throw them into my GPSR. So what I do, though, is I keep a set of the disposable AA lithium batteries in there, which has a shelf life of about a decade. Then I toss it in the cache bag, which stays in the car. So if I need it for an emergency charge of the phone or whatever, and I also keep a charge cable, of course, it's in my car, and then I grab the bag when I'm on the trail. So I always have that available as an emergency backup, but I haven't used it, and that's why I'm thrilled I haven't used it, because it's my emergency backup. But some others have actually used the rechargeable batteries, those NIM batteries, which makes it a little less of an emergency device and more of like the daily top-off on the trail. And I just checked the Cache at Night website this morning, and the AA emergency charger is only like $14.95, so a nice little value. So check it out from the link on our show notes, or you can head over to cacheatnight.com and see all of their good toys for yourself.
That's right. I mean, $15, that's a great emergency battery to have in the car. And, if you burn through it, you can stop at a local convenience store, pick up more batteries, and keep going. It's a great little tool. Now, last week, we asked a question. What 2 people are credited with inventing the parking meter, the bane of our existence since 1935? It was interesting seeing the responses this time around. Many people commented that it was very interesting reading. So there you go. Not only are we producing a great podcast, but we're producing interest in other things around the globe, including parking meters. So, in a nutshell, Dave, whom were the 2 inventors, and who was drawn as the lucky winner of the Project-GC.com membership? It's summertime. It's not even close to winter.
Well, those 2 folks who your city financial officer loves and everyone else now hates are Carlson McGee and Gerald Hale. So congratulations to Limax. You're the lucky winner of the Project-GC.com code.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for everyone who's entered. And I did think it was kind of funny when I was reading up on that I think it was the second installation, some of the citizens in town went and chopped down the parking meters with axes.
I was interested that the first name of the parking meter was the Black Maria. I thought that was Mariah. Oh, maybe it
I
was
could be
Mariah.
Yeah.
Black Mariah. Anyway, I thought it was, I don't know, shall we say, interesting. We'll just say it's interesting that they came up with
Interesting.
such a
Yeah.
name.
Interesting trivial knowledge. And I'm hoping that someone will correct us, as did Eng Phil, who emailed about the GSAC limits. And he said, this one relates to the GSAC API limit question. I don't use GSAC myself, not a Windows user, so I can't speak as to what GSAC is actually doing. But if importing into GSAC uses up API limits, then GSAC is doing something wrong. The API provides a call, get full pocket query data, which is documented as returns a complete geocache object without those full caches counting against the user's cache limit. This is the method Geosphere uses, and I can confirm that as I type this, I have been importing 8 pocket queries consisting of just over 7,000 caches between them into Geosphere, and my API limits have not been touched. An easy way to confirm this, import a pocket query, then check your API limits. Not sure if GSAC can show that, but Geosphere shows the downloads remaining in the online profile task. If the numbers are different before and after the import, then GSAC is using the wrong API calls.
It's interesting. You know, I learned something interesting this week, is that you can now generate 10 pocket queries a day on Groundspeak instead of the 5. Which no one told me about, and my life is already completely altered because of it.
I seem to remember that having happened, but I had totally forgotten about that. I think it was over a year ago that they upped the API limit from 5 to 10, and I'm still still under that. I can only do 10 per day, or 5 per day.
5 per day.
I forget that there's.
You do 10. I did it. When I found out, I tested it by generating 10 pocket queries that I had saved. But the problem is the one I actually needed that day, I didn't use as my test, so I had to wait like the next day before I could actually grab the caches that I wanted because I didn't generate it the first day. So you still have to be careful which ones you pick.
See, and I've been using the pocket queries much more frequently these days as just that quick. I shouldn't say quick, but that better search functionality than what you can do from just the web interface, and it's just quicker and easier than dealing with trying to do some of that kind of stuff on the phone, because I can go to the computer, punch in the coordinates, punch in a geocache, go to there, show me the caches around, and get all 500 or 1,000. So I've been using it much more as a search tool lately than as my daily finds, or my daily local query, so that I can go and find caches any day I want.
Nice. You know, I still have all my pocket queries set up, though I hardly access them anymore because I just grab what's around me. So it's interesting. We've all kind of gone to a different extreme, haven't we?
Yeah, and we'll do another show, or I shouldn't say another show, because we haven't done one specifically on pocket queries, but we have had a couple of mentions about doing a pocket query show, so that's going to be coming up probably before the end of the year.
Just a little show? It's a quick show?
Just a little show.
You can just load it in your pocket and go?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, at the start of the show I mentioned we got email. So this one that I'm going to read really fits perfectly in with the topic of this show. Only Sleepin' sent us an email, said, after reading some of Dave's travel adventures on his blog last year. So, Dave, apparently you have one reader on your blog.
Woohoo, that's the one. Excellent.
That's the one. Yeah.
Thank you, Only Sleeping.
I decided I wanted to try and complete the DeLorme challenge for my state, Ohio. A year later, and I still don't have much done. I love the idea of seeing my state, but I seem to lack the planning skills necessary. I don't want to spend half my life planning things out. I'd really like to use my time wisely. Dave's blog provides ample evidence that it's possible to both sightsee and cache, even with young children in tow, but I can't quite get the hang of it. I'd love to know Dave's process.
Well, you're in luck. I am more than happy to share my process. I actually have like 3 pages of notes here, so it may take a while. So my process is as follows. The first thing that I do is I kind of figure out where I want to go. Specifically, like the DeLorme challenge, I live in roughly the middle of the state. So, you know, do you go west, do you go east, that sort of thing. So generally, which direction do I want to go? And for the DeLorme challenge, which pages do I want to grab? I use the same planning process for vacations for pretty much anything I do. So basically, the first steps: pick the destination, find out where you want to go, and figure out how much time you have. Is it going to be a day trip? Is it going to be a weekend? Going to be a 3-week road trip? And kind of figure out where your destination is. And then I look for caches at those destinations. Just pulling a pocket query. If I'm going to a random town, I'll pull a pocket query center on the center of town. And then I'll just start bookmarking caches, and I'll go to how I do that in a second. For multi-day trips, I also look for caches near the hotels and any stops I want to make. And I look everything between where I am and where I want to go, and look for places I want to stop at. If it's a multi-day trip, I'll plan out how far I'm going to go each day. And I have some rules of thumb for doing that with kids as well, which I'll get into in a second. But so figure out where you want to go, what your steps are going to be, and then look for caches on those steps. And then I usually put those in a spreadsheet, and because I have a wife, I share the spreadsheet with my wife, so she can also put in things that she wants to do. That way, it's not just me and my nefarious little plans. She also gets to do things that she may want to do and have some ideas. So once I have the destination set up, I start. I create a caches along route pocket query that goes through the where I want to go, and then I grab that pocket query. I don't have GSAC. I do all of my planning online using geocaching.com. And when it comes to things like DeLorme, I sometimes also use Google Earth. But 90% of my planning is on geocaching.com. So I pull a caches along route. I sort it by favorite points. And I just start going through the list and looking for the things that interest me. Any virtuals I immediately grab because they're normally in interesting spots. Earth caches I look at. Oftentimes they're interesting. Sometimes they're a little much. The one thing I find with Earth caches is they just take some time to do because there's like a whole lesson involved, and sometimes you have to measure stuff, which is too much. And depending on what I'm doing, if I have a short day, like I'm going to only go a couple hours in the car, I have more time to explore, I'll expand what types of caches I do. If I know I'm going to be in the car for 8 hours and only have time to grab a couple caches, I'll limit my focus to the easy finds, the larger caches, those types of things. And I take all those caches that I like, and I put them in a bookmark folder. And usually I call or bookmark list. And usually I call the list something like best of trip or best of destination. And then I build up this list, and if it's multiple days, I build up a route for each day and do the exact same process and put it all in the same list. And then I build up a map. I also have a bookmark list I call my bucket list, and those are those caches that people say, you really must do this cache if you're in town. So I keep a track of those, and then I'll look at the bucket list and see if any of the caches fall along those routes and see if they're doable. Then I add those to the list.
Yes. And we should probably mention real quick, these are, the bookmark lists are premium-only features, but if you wanted to go and do this separately, you could do it by creating your own external list. There is that link under the drop-down menu under each of those GC numbers on the cache page, and you can copy that out to have a URL that you can just paste into another file. So if you don't have the premium membership and want to try some of this planning, you can do it that way as well. Or you can even do it in the apps. Most of the apps will have some way to save the caches even if you're not a premium member.
Exactly.
The problem is if you're not a premium member, you don't get to save much of the information in anything but the official app.
Right. Another thing you might want to do is just export it into Google Earth by downloading the description and loading it to Google Earth, and you can group them there. The reason why Google Earth is that it's very visual and easy to see where things are, and you have a fairly fine control over what interests to get shown. Oftentimes I'll use Google Earth. I'll map out where the hotels are, where the points of interest are that I want to see, and then map the caches on there as well, so I can visually see exactly where everything is. At this point in time, I basically have a set of pocket queries for all the caches on route, and then I have all my the caches that I want to do, or I've figured out are caches that are good candidates to do in a separate bookmark list. At that point in time, I generate all of the pocket queries. So for the caches along route, I generate one that has every single cache in the pocket query, and then I generate another pocket query based on my best of list. And I download all of those to all my devices. I put every single cache that I can into my GPSR, and then on my devices, be it the tablet using usually Locust Pro, sometimes CacheSense, or on my laptop, I'll import them into Google Earth. I'll keep the caches separate. So the favorites pocket query, the best of pocket query, I'll keep it as a separate list. The reason for that is odds are when I do my do my day and drive from cache to cache, I'm going to go from each cache on that best of list. So I want to be able to quickly see which ones those are. But anybody who's gone on a road trip, especially if you have children, you take a lot of side trips, for gas stops, kid maintenance, various things. So you find yourself on stopping where you didn't expect to stop, and it's nice to have those all the caches along your route. So when you stop off in the my wife needs to take my daughter in to go to the bathroom, that I can spend some time at. Hopefully, there's a cache nearby I can do. Stuff like that. So you have options wherever you find yourself.
Exactly.
So that's my basic how I do things.
Yeah, your basic trip planning.
Right. Yeah. For the DeLorme specifically, again, I don't have GSAC, so GSAC users probably have it easier because there's macros that will map out where the grids are. So when I did the North Carolina, actually, and the Rhode Island one, the first thing I did is I drew out those grids on Google Earth, and I color-coded them which pages I found, which pages I need to find, and which pages I can ignore. And then when I had them on the map, when I planned my route, when I did the caches along route, I just made sure that the route that I picked happened to go through those pages that I needed. And then once I did that, I just did a cache along a pocket query along the route and picked out the caches that I normally pick out. But with a DeLorme, because one of your objects is to find a cache on every single page, I always added to my list the very first 2 caches on my route that I passed. Regardless of whether I really were interested in them or not, simply because I needed a signature on a log, and that was the interest for that cache. So the first 2 caches that looked like they were there, I grabbed. And the reason for 2 is you only need 1 for the DeLorme challenge, but you always need a backup, and the backup has saved me many times. So I usually grab the first 2, and then since you're driving through, you may as well find some of the better caches along the route as well. And that's basically that. Yeah, with the DeLorme stuff, I basically just picked a destination and found the caches along the route, and just drew a route to get there and just planned it that way.
Yeah, it's finding the time is probably the hardest part of doing something like the DeLorme Challenge, especially in some of these larger states. It's
time. I mean, planning-wise, doing a weekend DeLorme Challenge, I spent maybe an hour planning. Maybe 2 because I'm a bit of a geek. But it didn't take a lot of time considering I was going to spend a whole weekend out doing it. For long trips like the 3-hour or 3-week road trips that I sometimes take, I might spend like 10 hours over a couple months planning and tweaking things. But the planning part doesn't take a great deal of time once you kind of get your technique down. But I find it pays off dividends in the long run because you are hitting those quality caches, and you've kind of looked over the area and seen some of the places what you want to be. There are some places I've been to that didn't have caches in them, but I happened to notice them while I was examining the maps. And said, hey, that looks interesting, and check those out because of that. The biggest ball of twine in Minnesota actually is one of them. I went to Minneapolis.
You are a Weird Al fan, aren't you?
I am a Weird Al fan, and I went to Minneapolis because I'd never been to Minnesota, and then I was like, I'm missing something here. And then I remembered there was a Weird Al Yankovic song with the biggest ball of twine, and I looked it up, and sure enough, it was an hour away, and there was a cache there. So, going there was a given.
Cool. Well, I did want to touch on the spreadsheet thing because that's something that I do. In Bad Cop, I think you had mentioned that was the first time you had seen the spreadsheet done like that for caching when we went to the Midwest, or to the Midwest, to the Geo Woodstock this year.
Exactly. So yeah, go ahead and talk about that, Daryl.
Yeah, well, I want to get a feel for what Dave, you're doing with it. But what we did with ours is we had primary and secondary targets. So we had these caches that we had to hit for whatever reason. There, maybe a really great cache, so we wanted to hit it. Maybe it was just we had to get the one in that state, and this was the only one we could go to. That kind of stuff. And what I had done is calculate the drive time between each of those caches, and put in, here's what time we have to leave this cache in order to make it to the next one and still have the time, with a little calculation so that we could punch in the time that we had done that cache, so we'd know, okay, the next cache we're going to be over our allotment, so we have to skip these extra caches and that kind of thing. So what is it that you actually put on your spreadsheets?
My spreadsheets are much, much simpler than that. My spreadsheets are almost just basically the date that we're going to be there. Usually employ the spreadsheets when it's a multi-date, like a week-long trip or something like that, or longer. And I put the date I'm going to be there, the city that we're going to end up in, the time it takes to get there, usually the hotel information, just so it's quick and convenient, and then a list of things that we want to do along the way. Everything else I kind of do mentally in my head. Although my family comes with me a lot on caching trips, I tend to do it. I'm the caching guy in the family, so I can just keep a lot of the stuff mentally in my head because I don't need to coordinate with a lot of other people. That's basically all I do with the spreadsheet. One thing I do keep is kind of what you do is. Some caches are caches that look like they might be fun, but if you miss them, you don't really care. And some caches are must-do, and I'll regret it if I don't try. And I keep those in my head because one of the tips to think a successful caching trip, especially if you have kids, is flexibility. Because you never know when the kids are going to need something, or lunch is going to take an extra time because they need to play, or whatever life gets in the way. Knowing which caches you can skip and which caches you must get allows you to make those quick in-field decisions, so you know what's going on.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I liked adding those times. Originally I had started just doing the list in Evernote and then sharing those notes so that everyone on the trip could see where we were. But I found that by doing it in the Google spreadsheet, sharing that, and having the apps on the phone where we can then live update, it really gave us a better sense, and we ended up skipping one or two caches, I believe it was, Bad Cop. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we were running a little later than we wanted to, and had we not had those times, oh boy, I used a double negative again. If we didn't have those times, yeah, if we didn't have those times on there, it would have been a situation where we would miss the flash mob, I think it was, event that we were trying to make it to, because we would have hit those two caches and it would have taken just that little bit longer, and we were running in. I think by the time we parked, we actually made it to ground zero for the flash mob like 2 minutes late.
Exactly. I mean, and if we had hit those other caches, we wouldn't have found a decent place to park in time. And we parked several blocks away, so it was, there were other things to consider. But yes, we were able to make it because we had planned ahead. Now, Dave, you mentioned children. I remember when I was traveling with smaller children. My children are now both teenagers, so that means my paycheck goes directly to Costco in order to keep them fed. I would have to, stop for the restaurants with the play places, to get them up and moving, and then hit the hotel or motel early, especially if it had a pool, to, get them out and moving again, tire them out so they would go to sleep. So when you're doing your caches along a route or whatever, what difficulty terrain limits are you putting on that?
It depends on the cache. Typically, when I'm traveling with the kids, I try to keep it to a difficulty terrain level about 2-2. But it depends on, again, how much time I have, and whether or not I can negotiate with the wife to see if she will watch the kids, which actually happens a fair amount. I have a pretty awesome wife that way. She's not a casher. She likes going on the road trips, but she doesn't really like finding the containers or doing the planning.
Sure.
But typically especially if I need to kind of be somewhere at the end of the day, that's guaranteed. I typically I look for caches that are 2-2 or smaller, and of course highly favorited if I can find them, and usually larger containers because they're usually easy to find.
That's true.
And I also, if I know the kids are going to be there, I will also look for friendliness of the location. If I have a choice between two caches, one's in a parking lot, one's at a park, and I want the kids to play, it's much better to stop off at the park. But if you do stop at
play, don't stop off at the park.
Yes.
Like, let's just go play on the swings. No, I'm going to find this in 30 seconds, be gone. But it ends up being a 30-minute stop anyway.
But if you want, even if you're going to let them play, find the cache first, then let them play. Because once my son hits the swing set, you're not getting him away. So.
Well, don't forget the kids make good cover for muggles too.
They do actually. It's quite effective. I've abused my children in that way. Not abused them, but
you've used them.
A child with a dirty diaper sitting on a bench really clears off the strangers on that same bench. Just saying.
There's the tip of the show, folks.
Wow.
I'll always borrow young children still in diapers. Yeah. Okay. I will say this. I don't recommend that you force your kids who are out of diapers to wear diapers again so that you have some way to chase away the muggles.
This is true, but they have their own way of being disgusting.
You could keep an extra dirty diaper along with you and just pull it out. You don't even have to change the kid. The kid can just be sitting on the bench, but if they see the dirty diaper sitting next to you, that bench will not be used for an hour. Guaranteed.
Okay. This just reminded me of one of those theme park tips that I heard. If you want to make sure your stroller doesn't get stolen in the theme park, take a clear plastic bag, throw a new diaper in there, and pour some Coke in it.
There you go.
Tie that to the handlebars, and no one will ever take your stroller.
That's brilliant.
There you go. I didn't need that mental image. I will tell you one quick story, though. My daughter and I were looking for a cache, and she was much younger. And, we walked up to the park, and there were people sitting at the table. It had to be that table, And we sat and we waited a few minutes, and they're not going to go. We're going to have to give this one up. She goes, "Oh, no, Dad, watch this." And she walks up to the table, looks underneath, and said, "Yeah, Dad, there's gum under this table, too." And she grabbed the cache and brought it to me.
Nice.
I'm like, okay, now how do we put it back? She goes, "Oh, I got this, Dad." "No, I think it's strawberry gum, Dad." And she like, I remember that vividly, and my daughter earned much respect in my eyes that day.
As well she should.
It's fantastic.
All right, well, we've talked a bunch about how to actually do these caches, but I think some of the stories that you have about your early caching on the road really are something we want to touch on because they're kind of cool from what I have gotten the preview of.
Yeah, you're talking about my first cache?
Yeah, in Europe.
Yeah, so back in the July of 2008, I was on a work trip for 4.5 months to Europe.
Wow.
They were building a new facility there, my company was, and I volunteered to go along because, hey, on the weekends I got basically a company-paid vacation in Europe, and I brought my wife along, and we were in. It was actually between I lived in Canada at the time because I'm Canadian, and I was moving to the States, and this was like the 4.5 months between Canada and the States. So I just put all my stuff in storage, went to Europe for 4.5 months, and then got back, took all my stuff out of storage, and brought it across the border. But anyways, I was there for 4.5 months, and it was about a month into it, and another co-worker of mine from a different office came into town for a couple weeks, and he asked me, "What do you want to do this weekend?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "You want to try geocaching?" I was like, "What's that?" And then he explained it to me, and I said, yes, I do want to do this. So that Saturday we My wife and Thomas was his name, and myself. We got into the rental car. We drove off to this park in Mons, Belgium, and he kind of showed us the ropes. This is GPS. This is the coordinates. This is what this is how you get there. This is the description. Yada yada yada. The whole how do you do this caching thing? And we went there. We walked across the park, looked around. My wife actually made the very first find. I think it was a film canister. So that was awesome. And while we were there, we saw black swans, which are apparently very rare. At least according to him, he's a bird watcher, so I'm assuming he knows. So it was kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. This is kind of fun. He says, do you want to do another one? I said, yes, indeed I do. So we looked up the closest caches. There weren't a whole lot of caches in Mons at that time. The closest cache was like 20 miles away. Ish. So it was getting close to lunchtime, so we got in the car, started driving towards it. We found a restaurant, and we ordered, and Europe takes forever to eat, so it took like 2 hours. So while we were there, we were looking at GPS, and we realized, wait a second, we were in Belgium, but this GPS says specifically that we're in France. And sure enough, without us knowing, we crossed the border into France, which was kind of awesome. And if you've not been to Europe, crossing at least the Western countries, crossing the border is really no different now than crossing in state lines. But still, to the uninitiated, crossing into a different country without knowing it was pretty cool. So we continued on to this cache, and it was in another French park, apparently. And it was on top of this old mines, slag pile. So it was basically a bunch of, I forgot what type of mine it was, but there was this big mine pile it was like from the 40s, so it was already grown over, and they turned into a park. So we ended up scaling this slag hill because we didn't realize it was a park at the time. I started early with the whole adage of hard way in, easy way out.
Mm-hmm.
So I was scaling up this thing, and if anybody knows me, I am not athletic in the slightest, but I was like, whatever. I scaled up this thing, scared out of my mind, got to the top. It was nice and flat. It was a puzzle cache, so we had to get information looking around. It was actually looking at a barn off in the distance because we were 60 feet up and up the hill, so we got a nice view of the countryside. There's a barn off in the distance with a number on it, and that was part of the clue to do our math. So we did that. We took the easy wet path down, and then we actually didn't find that cache, which is kind of annoying. My second cache was a DNF, but I was hooked at that point in time because out of the blue, out of nowhere, I went from my plans were sitting in a hotel in Mons, Belgium, kind of going, I don't know what to do, to accidentally going to another country and standing on an old mine slag pile, looking around like this amazing countryside, and I was pretty much hooked. I didn't really know I was hooked at that point in time, but I was like, this is very intriguing. I must do more. The next weekend, we did some more caching in Brussels. I found like 5 caches there. And then after that, this is the biggest regret of my life. I've only found one other cache in Europe during that time. Even though I went to, I calculated 6 different countries, I only found 1 cache. And after that, went home back to Canada, moved to the States, and it wasn't about 200 days or so later, it's my longest slump, that I found my first U.S. cache, and from there I took off, and I've been caching like a fiend ever since.
Excellent.
Yes.
Up to 100 finds now?
A little bit more than that, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, before we move on, we have a question through the live Q&A from Lewis, who wants to know, what is the largest challenge you faced when caching abroad?
Largest challenge I faced when caching abroad is probably the language barrier. Simply, one thing about Belgium that's interesting, because it's a French and a Dutch country, and if you can kind of draw a line through the middle of the country, and one side's French, one side's Dutch, and there's a little bit of German up in the top. But I was in the French side, and the French don't translate things. They're French. The Dutch translate things and will show you things in English. So when you're in the French side, you have to do a lot of the translating yourself. And the tools are better nowadays, but back when I was doing it, I don't even think Google Translate existed. I used Babelfish to translate some stuff. and it wasn't the best translation, but the language barrier was probably the biggest thing. Um, I've really done very little amount of foreign caching outside of North America since then. And when I did, it was in Ireland, so they speak English of a sort. And so yeah, it's that and network connectivity. It's amazing how quickly you get addicted to having instant data on your phone, and it's way expensive overseas.
Yeah. Now your wife also piped up and said that you only had the car GPS in Europe as well.
I did. We brought a Nuvi for the specific purpose of driving around Europe. So I bought my very first GPS was a Nuvi 260, and I bought the European maps. And so the very first cache I was finding with the Nuvi, and the Nuvi is not a great caching device now. It was even worse back then.
Yeah.
It would show you where the cache was and draw a line, but as you walked, it wouldn't update the line. So you kind of had to
Not
guess.
on a road.
And the battery only lasted like 2 hours. So for the first few caches, I used that. Luckily, the person I was with had a Garmin 60 CSX, which is part of the canonical GPS for the 2008 timeframe. He had one of those, so I wasn't completely stranded. And actually, once I got back to the States, the very first thing I did caching-wise was purchase my own Garmin 60 CSX, which I used for my first 1,000 finds until I upgraded to a Montana. But yeah, the Nuvi, I still use the Nuvi to this day for navigating on the roads, but if I had to use that to find caches on the field, I would probably not be a cacher today.
Yeah, going down memory lane with the Nuvies. Remember when they had that 500 series that was supposed to be the everything unit for the light outdoors? It had the geocaching support. It would do all of that kind of stuff. They also did that. I can't remember what the package was, but there was another software package that was supported where you'd have the talking guided driving tours, so you could do like the Route 66 and get the guided tour of Route 66 with the narration and everything. And it also did Where I Goes. It was the only Nuvi units that did the Where I Goes.
Wow, actually sounds kind of fun.
It would have been if it worked right.
Yeah, it was a very intriguing unit, but it never caught on. Well,
and it was really expensive.
Well, a lot of the functionality is built into the trail GPSs because they'll do navigation. So if you can still buy a unit that does everything, but it comes in the form of a trail GPS, not a car GPS.
Well, actually, I don't think you can get units anymore that support Where I Go. I think that they've officially phased those out. You can probably still get the original Oregon series, not the 600s, but the earlier models.
The 450s.
The 450s and the 550s I've still seen on cheap sales. But those are the only ones, the last of the Garmin units that will do the Where I Goes. But they won't do the audio. And that was the thing about the Nuvies, is that they had the better audio support, so they could do spoken word stuff.
So you just have to go grab a pocket PC. You can load Where I Go on that.
Yep. It was such a mess.
Yes.
I've got one of those, and I never got it to work right. I even had one of the supported ones, the Mio DigiWalker 550, if memory serves. Now I got to go and look that thing up.
Ouch. Though, the smartphone, let me just push it. The smartphone is what we're using today. It will do all those things for you.
Oh, absolutely. And
if you have data.
If you have data.
Well, you don't even need to have data for most of it. You can preload the Where I Go cartridge. You can preload your caches. And we're actually going to be talking a lot about how to cache without any data on a smartphone come September 4th. And Dave, you're going to be back for that one as well. Yeah, it's going to be something that we'll talk about there in a lot more details, but so we'll not dwell on it now. But yeah, for like the Where I Goes, I hate trying to download those in the field because I have so much trouble with the Where I Go site actually giving me the files. I can't even get it to log in half the time from my phone in the field.
Yeah, well, when we were caching together, Daryl, on the way home from Geo Woodstock, we hit a Where I Go, and I downloaded it in the car on the way there, and it worked, but it was a bit of a hassle.
Yeah, well, and I've had it work flawlessly many times. I've also had it like the last couple of months. It will not let me into my account from within the app, so I have to go through Dropbox to get the cartridge loaded. I have to download the cartridge in Safari if I'm going to do it on the phone. But at that point, I just download it on the computer, put it in Dropbox, grab it from Dropbox on the phone, open with, and I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a lot of extra steps.
Yeah, that's my experience. I've never had the app download because apparently the Where You Go app you can download the cartridges directly, and it's not worked for me ever.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is that Chris and I are talking about the official Where I Go app that Groundspeak purchased. On Android, it's that third-party one, which does have some advantages from what I've heard, but I've never used it to know how that works, and I know a lot of people have a lot of trouble getting the cartridges in. And I think that one, the Android third-party one, does have more issues with getting caches directly off the website.
Yeah, that's been my experience at least. I never used the original one, so I'm not sure, but yeah, the Where You Go, if you get the cartridge, it works okay, but getting the cartridge in there is sometimes an exercise in frustration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. What hardware do you actually use when you go out? You talked about using the Nuvi for caching. You mentioned that you had the Montana,
Right.
but have since replaced it. So what is your current suite of tools when you're actually out on a road trip?
My suite of tools, in my Geo bag, I have an eTrex 30 that I use as my trail GPS, and I usually keep the Montana as a backup because you always need a backup. I usually keep all the caches on my phone, which is a Nexus 4, but I use as my smartphone device, I use a Nexus 7 primarily, mainly because it has the bigger screen. And it has a bit more memory than my Nexus 4 does. So I usually use the Nexus 7 as a where's the next cache, managing the cache list between the best of that I'm looking for. I usually cache if I have enough lead time in my trip. I will download the satellites for it, so I use that for if I need a satellite view of things. But so the Nexus 7 is my kind of workstation that I use, and then I use the eTrex 30 as a navigation hold in my hand device. And in my car, I also have a Nuvi. I forget the model. I think it's a 7250 or somewhere in the 7000 range. It's a new one that came out, and I use that for navigating from cache to cache in the car.
So what do you use to sync all these devices together so that you're looking at the same set of caches?
Typically what I do is I use Locus Pro on the Nexus 7, which will download pocket queries from geocaching.com.
Mm-hmm.
So I use that, and then I use it to organize everything. And then from Locus Pro, I export GPX files onto the tablet, and then I use the Nexus Media Importer app and the on-the-go cable to load those onto the GPS.
Nice.
And then the Nuvi, I haven't traditionally loaded caches onto the Nuvi for the simple reason that it's kind of annoying to be driving. I find it annoying when you're driving through, you just see cache after cache after cache, because one instinct is, it's a cache, I must go find it.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing is, sometimes they get so many in an area, it becomes noise, and it's harder to actually see where you want to go. But lately I have been loading the best of into the Nuvi for the simple reason that I can type in the GC code.
Yeah,
I can type in the GC code and it just gets it. Otherwise, I have to type in the whole GPS coordinate, which takes a lot more time.
Okay.
My DigiWalker P550 does still work.
Nice.
Though, the battery is pretty much toast at this point. And of
Carol,
course, it never did get a GPS signal.
you truly are a GeoGearhead.
Yes, a GeoGearhead geek.
I was thinking Daryl should open up a museum.
No, I don't have enough stuff for that. I do tend to get rid of a lot of the toys, but keep a few of the key ones around so that I can, go back and go, ooh, look how awful it used to be.
Yeah, when I started, I used a BlackBerry to keep all my cache descriptions on, and I used was it Cashberry?
Yeah,
Was the app?
Cashberry, which became Cash Sense.
Sense.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yes.
But back in the day, it was pretty ghetto on the BlackBerry. So I feel your pain. I didn't even have GPS most of the time because it was back in the day when you had to be connected to your host network, your cell network, for the GPS would work.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was using it, primarily I was in Europe, and I was not on my host network, and the GPS was just like, I'm not going to work. And to this day, I curse them.
Which is always something good to do.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
Always curse the networks.
Yes. Blame it on the networks, not the phone.
No, I blame the phone.
Oh.
Yeah, the phones get some blame, but the networks are evil. They deserve the blame.
I'll
It's
blame
just-
everybody.
I was going to say I shouldn't really say that.
Just don't blame yourself or your wife, and you'll
Yeah,
be good.
not all networks are evil. Just some of the big ones, and the bigger they are, the more evil they tend to be.
They're eviler.
They're eviler.
They're more eviler.
That sounds like a good choice for the next droid name. It's the Droid Eviler.
There you go.
It might clash with the don't be evil thing, but we can get around that. We got lawyers.
Well, but yeah, that's Verizon's brand is the Droid.
That's true.
It's true. Yeah.
And they are evil. They know.
Well, and they had a phone called Evil.
They did?
Yeah, I gotta go look that up again. But I do remember on Android Central's podcast them talking about the Evil. I think it was EVL. I don't think it was EVIL.
Like evil as in Knievel?
Oh, what? I might be completely off base thinking, getting the Eva or Evo rather confused, which would make more sense.
Evo L. That would be a good phone.
You know what? There are images for Droid Evil showing up in my Google search.
Well, if it's on Google, it's got to be true.
Yeah. I've looked at Google. Don't tell everybody about Google. But yeah, it's our secret.
Okay.
You can find
I think there's an app called Evil Droid, so I'm hashing a bunch of different stuff.
Evil Droid.
Evil Droid Studios Limited. That's the name of the company. Makes an app called Hyper Havoc, and we've just given them a free plug.
Yay!
Be expecting a check or a bill in the mail for this plug. Thank you very much.
Yes.
For supporting the GeoGearHeads.
Yes, your support is much appreciated. Okay. Anyway, now that we've completely tangent off the travel thing, and we are getting long for the show, are there any last-minute tips that you want to share for people who might be caching with children?
I have a couple, actually. One is when my son was really young, we're talking, a year old, I used to do what I called Zeke time. And what that was is for every 2 hours I was expected to be on the road, I would add an extra half an hour. Because kids at that age, they sleep a lot, but when they wake up, they require attention. So I built that into the schedule. A couple other tips. Try to match the nap times. Young kids need naps, and they always usually nap at the same time of day. I nap in mid-afternoon, so I try to plan my day so I do a lot of the adventuring and exploring in the morning when they're awake, and then if I have to put some miles in, I'll try to do that in the afternoon so I can just be driving on the highway while they sleep, which tends to work better. Another tip I have we discovered recently is food. If you've got a bunch of adults, you can go to a fast food restaurant and you can be in and out in 10 minutes and be fed. That never happens with children. It usually takes about an hour. But what I found, because they need to eat and they take a while to eat, then they need to go play to burn off some energy. So what we've been doing lately is we'll hit a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A or whatever with a play place. Me and my wife will get some food, sit down and eat, let the kids play and do their thing. And then we'll take the food with us in the car, let them eat in the car after we're driving. So that way they've had all that time to play. And then while we're driving down the road and they're kind of not doing anything, then they can feed themselves at their own leisure. which works if they're old enough to not make a whole lot of mess, but typically they do okay.
Well, and it probably depends on the type of food. So, like no soups.
No soups. It's typically the burgers and fries or the chicken nuggets and fries type deal.
Yeah, I could see mac and cheese being a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spaghetti.
It depends if you like it in the pockets of your seats. The back pockets of the front seats there.
That might be a good way to resurface your headliners as well.
Oh, yeah. Little ketchup up there. Just paint that red. That would work.
Abstract art. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
hide any of those dents and dings by just giving it a nice textured finish.
Yeah, I do have one last piece of advice. When we go, as adults, we go caching, and the destination is the ammo box. With kids, they don't necessarily care about the ammo box, but they care about the destination. So if you're going to a fun place, I tend to talk up the fun place, not the cache at the fun place. One example is in Prince Edward Island, which is a province in Canada that's a little island on the East Coast. There is a beach that is a squeaky beach. And the reason why it's squeaky is the way the sand, it's crystallized. When you walk on it, it squeaks a little, kind of like walking in like really cold, dry snow. And it's a beach, and there's like 2 of them in the world, and one of them happens to be there. And of course, there's an earth cache there, so I wanted to go. But I talked up the squeaky beach part of it to the kids. So when they got there, they were super excited, and I've never seen Zeke run so fast, getting from the car to the sand. And the biggest ball of twine in Minnesota was the same thing. There's a cache there, but we went for the biggest ball of twine, and Daddy happened to get a smiley along the way. Not making it about the cache so much as about the adventure as a whole, I think keeps kids more interested and also less disappointed if you have a DNF or it's just a micro and there's no swag or stuff like that. It's not the pinnacle of the trip. It's just something you do along the way.
So, Dave, on the way to the biggest ball of twine,
yes,
did you drink diet chocolate soda?
I wanted to. I couldn't find any.
Oh. Okay.
But we did play the song over and over and over again, and I still play it to this day.
I do too. It's one of my favorite Weird Al songs.
Even my 2-year-old was singing it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, every once in a while you just hear soda, soda from the back. It was very cute.
Nice. Hey, if you got a little time, Dave, maybe we can talk about some of those more unique locations we found through caching, because I just had another one of those weekends where even in what's really my closest major city, I just found a whole bunch of cool places that I didn't know existed without caching. So maybe we sit down and do a little bit of that as a patron special.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier our thanks for all of those patrons. If you want to become a patron yourself, you can visit our website, click on that patron link, and our Patreon link, which takes you to our campaign, and just a couple of bucks a month really helps us out. And if you're doing at least $2.50 a month, you get access to a bunch of those special shows, a bunch of hangouts. We try to do a hangout a month for the patrons, where you, as a patron, actually get to come in. And we've got one of those coming up in just a couple of weeks. And
you better believe it.
Yeah, Bad Cop's actually going to try to be live from the block party for that one. Think you can do it?
Oh, of course I can do it. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I was going to say there's thousands of geocachers in town.
Thousands of geocachers, all with phones going on. But you know what? It's worked in the past. I'll have a couple of different methods to get online, and I'll do my best to do a hangout from there. The worst case scenario is I'll place a call.
Yep. So we'll get you in somehow and find out what's going on early in the morning on the block party.
There you go.
So
I'll take you in the car as I drive up there. How's that?
Yeah. Yeah, and we get all kinds of fun stuff on there as well. Like we've been doing every week a post about something that the Bad Cop or I use and like, and I think the last one was my poppin' batteries. I can't really remember. So there's just a whole bunch of cool extra stuff. Maybe it's geocaching, maybe it's not. So if you want access to that, you can join us over at patreon.com, search for the GeoGearHeads, or better yet, just follow the link on our websites to the Patreon campaign.
Now, I know many of you love these giveaways that we do every week, and it's that time. It's a time when we tell you how to get your name into the drawing for one of the prizes from our newest prize donor. So what you need to do is get your email client ready. Title this email Question 137. That's going to GeoGearHeads@CashManiacs.com. Now, I have a feeling this is going to be a popular one and maybe a little easy. So, which author is credited for the origin of the term geomuggle, or just muggle for short? Include your answer and your geocaching.com screen name by 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on August 13th. And that needs to be titled Question 137 and sent to GeoGearHeads@CashManiacs.com. Good luck on that drawing from a prize from coinsandpins.com. Yes, that's right. And make sure you listen next week for the winner of that drawing and a discount code from coinsandpins.com.
Well, we've got a bunch of really great shows coming up, too. So you want to check those out, and we have that list at the geogearheads.com/upcoming, or just follow the link on the GeoGearHeads page as well. And August 14th, which is next week, we're going to have the geocaching doc on. Then August 21st is going to be 3D printed maps. That's going to prove to be another awesome show, I'm sure. Then August 28th is our next randomized show, number 25. So make sure to hit that one as well, and that's going to be with Sonny of the Podcaster podcast. DeBear comes back on September 4th for the Caching Offline. Then September 11th is our Geocaching Essential Tools show. So we've got all of those great shows coming up over the next several weeks. That's 6 weeks worth of shows that we're giving you in advance. So make sure to check those out. If you have any feedback, you can call that into 206-350-3647 or email us at geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com.
You can always check the Cashmaniacs website at cashmaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com, or through the many channels of social media. Your support helps keep the Cashmaniac shows coming, so please consider becoming a patron or making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support these Cashmaniac shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show is copyright 2014 by Daryl Wattenberg, all rights reserved.